Burkina Faso's ruling military junta has passed a law criminalising homosexuality and making it punishable with up to 5 years in prison. Foreigners convicted under the new law will be deported. The bill, directed at what it called perpetrators of homosexual practices, was passed unanimously by the transitional parliament's 71 unelected members. It's part of broader reforms regarding family and citizenship legislation. Homosexuality is banned in about 30 other African nations. Burkina Faso's neighbour and close ally Mali, which is also ruled by a military junta, passed a similar law in November. There's been growing opposition to LGBTQ+ rights in Uganda and Ghana, both of which have tightened anti-gay legislation in recent years. In Uganda, so-called aggravated homosexuality can be punishable by death, while engaging in same-sex relations can carry a life sentence. Since taking power in a 2022 coup, Burkina Faso's military leaders have launched sweeping reforms, including postponing elections that were expected to restore civilian rule.
All right, TRAORE's LGBTQ crackdown, Burkina Faso's new anti-gay law, and international reaction. We have that and many more stories. But before we do, let's do our intros. I'll turn it over to my co-host before I introduce myself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Gloria Ayo. I am the creator and host of a show called The African Story, and very happy to be back.
Of course, happy to have you. And I'm Joe Hatagwa, CEO of Authentic African. Our goal is to get people to visit, move, and invest in Africa. Today on This Week in Africa, we have a number of different stories that we will be reviewing. As you saw at the top, we are going to be talking about Burkina Faso's new LGBTQ criminalization. We'll be talking about Dangote, the truck accident that happened recently and what that means in the broader context. Nigeria separatist leader jailed in Finland. Also, Nigeria banned shea butter exports for 6 months. And then lastly, in terms of the critical updates, we will talk about Julius Malema being convicted of hate speech. But before we get into all of that, let's get into our first story. So as you saw in that video, Burkina Faso's anti-LGBTQ law has been adopted. The draft law has been adopted, and it is meant to criminalize homosexuality. It is punishable up to 5 years in jail. Now, I think many times social liberals agree with certain social stances, and then there are conservative liberals or conservative leftists who do not agree with those social elements. They may agree all on economic elements, but maybe not on social elements. So your thoughts on this story, or any context you want to give to this story before I give you my thoughts, Gloria?
Yeah, we can see a regional pattern. Mali criminalized same-sex activity in late 2024. Ghana's parliament passed an anti-LGBTQ bill in early 2024, even though final implementation stalled. Uganda passed a harsher law in 2023, and of course, Nigeria enforced a 2014 law for over a decade. But this law in Burkina Faso did not emerge in isolation. It began in mid-2024 when Captain Traore's government adopted a draft amendment. So what we're seeing is more of a government's growing indifference towards Western pressure, which is a shift in the nation's geopolitical orientation, because Burkina Faso has always tilted more towards tolerance of homosexuality, and France has been in support of that. But Traore is steering the country on a different course. He's more interested in regional autonomy, new partnerships, most notably with Russia. So they're no longer in an environment where Western diplomatic checks matter to them. Their reduced reliance on foreign aid and military partnerships has opened space for policies that would have previously met stronger international resistance. Now, Russia doesn't impose conditions on its partners, unlike France. Burkina Faso has even openly said that cooperation with Russia suits their country better. And Russia has positioned itself more as a security and infrastructure partner, not as a policymaker, which actually looks more tactically attractive to Traore's government because it appears to respect internal policy-making autonomy. Western pressure has long extended to economic conditions or democratic expectations. Alignment with Russia is seen as being free of these things. Even if this shift carries domestic or international risks, the fact that they are no longer dependent on Western pressure seems appealing. And I can't conclude without sharing this observation. I noticed that the media pounced on this anti-LGBTQ law, but of course, as we know, they remain quiet when the US openly challenged Traore just a couple of months ago through Michael Langley. And we can't help but notice this gap when global outlets cover the law restricting LGBTQ rights extensively, yet remain largely silent on widespread protests, both inside Burkina Faso and abroad, in reaction to US criticism of Traore. This isn't about whether or not you support LGBTQ. It's just about you, again, reporting the news as you should. Because at the end of the day, what determines what is newsworthy? Is the media supposed to be quiet when people are fighting for their resources or having anti-imperial sentiments? That's the question.
Oh, very well put. I think the only thing that I would add is, and I kind of mentioned this at the beginning before I threw it over to you, in America, being on the left usually means socially liberal and fiscally liberal, or fiscally liberal. Whereas on the continent of Africa, what you're finding is leftists are still socially conservative, because there's a social social conservatism around the continent of Africa, right? And so that's where I think you see that fracture in like global leftists, especially in the Western world versus African leftists, right? And so, and this isn't just specific to Africa, right? As you mentioned, Africa's alliances with the Far East, in many cases, they have more, some people would say communism, socialism are leftist belief systems, right? But those economies are very much on the left, but their thought processes in terms of social and social interactions are very conservative, right? So they're socially conservative. And so you just see Africa following in that same vein as many of their partners, especially those who who are openly partnering with the Far East. So we'll see if this has any broader economic and or social implications. I mean, I know that in general, Ibrahim Traore has been universally liked and supported. So we will see if that changes at all with this specific law. I will say that there are many people in the comments on Instagram who are in agreement with Ibrahim Traore on this. What you're finding is many folks are in agreement, and so we'll see what happens on in the Western media, Western world, beyond just this initial announcement. Let's see if it actually gets put into law. And I think the next thing that we'll look into, because Ghana obviously codified it into law, I think it was last year. They've been talking about it for a few years. I think where we'll find out if there's going to be broader support for this is when and if someone actually gets convicted, right? I think if someone gets arrested and is in jail for 5 years, I think that's when we'll find out if there's still broad support of it, or if or even if that will happen, right? Sometimes these things get put into law and it doesn't get enforced, right? So we will see if there's broad support. But as of right now, it seems as though, as you mentioned, there was a bit of, I guess, maybe outrage, or the Western media decided to report on this and not report on the protest of against the United States. So we will see if anything goes beyond this. All right, so moving on to the next story. We definitely needed to report on that because that is a big news story, and people are always interested in what's happening in Burkina Faso. And this was breaking news as of 2 days ago. So now we'll move on to the next story. And that is the story about Dangote, right? So as we mentioned earlier, and you guys may know this, but Dangote is seen as the richest black man on the planet, and sometimes, almost always, the richest person in Africa. That might seem a little bit counterintuitive. The richest black man on the planet, but not the richest person in Africa. Well, there are generally other folks in South Africa and other places who are not indigenous to Africa, but are billionaires based on Africa's resources. So that's why I say he's the richest black person on the planet, but not necessarily always the richest African. Because there are people who are non-indigenous Africans, like people of Dutch and descent, who live in South Africa, that sometimes teeter between number 1 and number 3 in terms of richest people in Africa. In any case, yeah, that happens frequently. That list can change. Yeah, exactly. And so, but we do want to get to this next story because I think it is one that is, it's kind of heartbreaking to hear a story like this. And to give a little bit of context, right? It was one of the vehicles that are part of the Dangote business empire that there was an accident that basically severely injured, and then eventually, if I'm not mistaken, the young lady passed, and it was a story that became continent-wide news. So we will play the story, and then we'll have some commentary on the other side.
Where a cloud of grief has fallen over the family of Big Brother Naija Season 7 winner Fina following the death of her younger sister, Ruth Otabo. Her passing was confirmed in a statement issued by the family's legal representatives, ECHO solicitors and advocates, and shared by Fina on her Instagram. The release says that Ruth died at about 6:30 a.m. yesterday, August 31st. Her death comes just weeks after a devastating accident near Auchi Polytechnic, Edo State, where a Dangote truck struck her, leading to the amputation of both her legs. Barely 6 days before the accident, she had celebrated her graduation from Auchi Polytechnic, a milestone that was tragically overshadowed by the events that followed. In response, the Dangote Group has now issued its own statement expressing condolences to the Otabo family. The company insists that it bore all her hospital bills, arranged for her evacuation to India, but was awaiting medical clearance from her doctors before the transfer could happen. Of course, this tragic loss has left her family, friends, and fans devastated. On social media, many Nigerians are now demanding tighter regulations, improved safety standards, and stricter accountability for the nation's largest fleet of heavy-duty vehicles. This is not just another truck accident, if you ask me. It's a systemic failure by big companies. Let's take a look at social media. May her soul rest in perfect peace. That reply guy says, "What baffles me is that a huge company like Dangote Group of companies doesn't have funds set aside for situations like this. It is sickening." Daniel Rega says, "Fina's sister is reportedly gone. Rest in peace. This may have been avoidable if she got better care in a better medical facility. It's pitiful, and it's even more sickening that people were making Fina the topic of discussion instead of focusing on the main issue. It quickly went from justice seeking to clout chasing. RIP to the deceased. May the heavens comfort the grieving family during this difficult time." This is such.
So there's plenty more that we can review on this story, but I mean, there has been reports of explosions of some of these vehicles, other accidents, and it seems that there isn't much regulation around the drivers, the amount of time they spend in the vehicles, tracking their time, right? You guys might know in the United States, right? If you're a truck driver, there are specific rules around how many hours you're allowed to be on the road. And they actually have to check in. They go to weigh stations. There are things put in place because many of these folks will drive 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, as long as you pay them by the hour, right? Yeah. And so you have to kind of force them to get sleep so that they make the road safe for other people. Now, the question is, I point to you, Gloria, is, if you can give some more context to the accidents that have been happening, and what does this mean, and in a broader context around Dangote and how people are perceiving him and his business.
Yeah, first and foremost, condolences to Fina and her family, and of course, families of all victims of accidents on our roads due to negligence of other drivers on the road. We know this has made, there's been a whole lot of buzz around this because of the sister of the personality involved, or the person who sadly lost her life. Imagine the stories that have gone untold. There's a woman, I read a comment where somebody said, maybe a decade ago or thereabout, or whenever, I think Dangote Group has been in business for a while. So I think it might have been around a decade. I don't want to misquote that, but she said she lost her husband due to the negligence of somebody driving a Dangote vehicle, allegedly. And they pursued it. She said her father-in-law fought so hard to try to get justice for his son, who was, who had been unalived, and nothing came out of it. And just for the family's peace of mind and for their sanity, they moved on. Now, this isn't to say Dangote, at the end of the day, the man is at the top of the pyramid. I don't know how much info he receives, but if Dangote pays attention to the news, he will see that there's been a pattern, and his fleet of trucks, that's the highest fleet of trucks of any company in Nigeria. But if he paid attention to the news, he would see that they are in the news more times than they should be, due to just drivers being so irresponsible. So he would have to take responsibility in that way. You're extremely wealthy. Why not invest in safety? You making your money, happy for you, right? But it shouldn't come at the cost. People's lives should not be at risk because your business is thriving. Dangote Cement says it runs more than 5,000 distribution trucks in Nigeria alone. But it doesn't look like there's been a tight enforcement on vehicle condition and driver hours, like as you pointed out, Joe, contrary to what happens here in America, because there have been cases showing these trucks being involved in too many accidents. And I do want to add that there are third-party operators that could have misused the Dangote brand. So because the company came out, explaining that. So we do need to separate the brand on a vehicle from legal ownership and control until there are more findings. But I will say, though, that Nigeria's heavy vehicle risk is a system problem, not just a Dangote problem. We have worn roads and bridges. We have inconsistent enforcement of speed limiters. We have long driver shifts. We have poor vehicle maintenance. Lagos has announced and re-announced daytime restrictions on trailers and truckers or tankers, but compliance and enforcement have actually been uneven. This explains why these tragedies occur and unfortunately may keep occurring.
Yeah, well put. I think you really covered it all. I think the only other thing that I'll say is, I know that the Dangote Group has said that there's potential that this was a third party. There are many different ways that businesses are held responsible and liable for things that happen, even if they outsource it to a third party. Generally, you're responsible for how that third party moves your goods, right? And so even if it wasn't Dangote's group's fault in terms of the vehicle driver not being hired by Dangote Group, etc., if they outsource it to a third party, they're responsible for how that third party utilizes their vehicles and transports their goods. And so, and that's what I would say in general. I'm not sure what that looks like in Nigeria in terms of enforcement of that and what the laws say, but generally in global economies where transportations, large amounts of transportation of goods and services happen between places, you are responsible for the companies that are transporting your goods. And so I would think that, as he's becoming aware of all of these things happening, there are going to be stricter enforcements by his team to ensure that, things do happen. I will also say I've done some research, and it seems as though most of these individual entities are owned by a larger entity, which is owned by an offshore entity. and I don't know how much liability they have if there was some litigation to be put into place against them. But I do see that the Dangote Group did mention that they did pay for funeral arrangements, or they will be, and that they did attempt to pay for medical bills, but apparently they didn't get clearance to send the woman to India. You know, I think more TBD on that. We'll hear from the family if that's actually true. But if that's the case, it does look like they attempted to do what they could, considering the circumstances. So, I mean, although we can say that they're at fault, and there is work to be done to ensure that there's better enforcement of rules, laws, standards to ensure that there are less accidents. You can see that they at least attempted to make good on this. But of course, it's a little bit too little too late, right? I think people would appreciate having the funeral paid for or medical bills paid for, but they'd rather have her in her whole self and back than to have to, get this money from them to pay for these expenses. So it is a really tragic and unfortunate story. And we hope that, they do make some adjustments and changes in the future.
And now, she had just graduated 6 days ago, and her sister Fina was saying, wow, that she was even like, thank God. Obviously, she must have, helped her through school. And then for that to happen, and the way she even got unalived is just so sad. Nobody deserves that. Nobody.
100%. Agreed. Now we're sticking to Nigeria with another story. Separatist leader Simon Ekpa was jailed in Finland. He received a 6-year jail sentence in Finland for quote unquote terrorism, tax fraud, and quote unquote ethical misconduct. Ekpa resided in Finland, leads what they call the Indigenous Peoples of Biafra, the IPOB, in Nigeria, a group allegedly linked to killings and abductions in the country's southeastern region. And we've reported on what was happening in Biafra previously. And so we're going to play this video, and we'll have some commentary on the other side.
In a landmark ruling, a Finland court has sentenced controversial Nigerian leader Simon Ekpa to 6 years in prison for terrorism-related offences. Ekpa, who is a Finnish citizen of Nigerian origin, was found guilty of supplying weapons and explosives to armed groups in Nigeria and attempting to promote the secession of the Biafra region through illegal means. The court rules that Ekpa played a key role in financing and directing violent operations carried out by pro-Biafra militants in southeastern Nigeria. Ekpa has denied all charges. The case comes amid ongoing unrest in the region, where the banned Indigenous People of Biafra, or IPOB, has clashed with Nigerian security forces in a long-running push for independence. The Nigerian government has called for Ekpa's extradition, insisting he must face justice at home. And there's more on this from our correspondent, Louisa Olani, who sends us this report from Lagos, Nigeria.
The long-anticipated Simon Ekpa's conviction by Finland courts for terrorism-related crimes and his sentencing to 6 years in prison has met with eulogies from the Nigerian government. It is a mixed reaction in the country as the Chief of Defense Staff, General Christopher Musa, Attorney General Lateef Fagbemi, and Information Minister Mohammed Idris all applauded the sentence, describing it as victory on terrorism, while the average citizen seems indifferent about the news. Now, we recall Nigerian government had repeatedly called for his arrest and extradition in recent years, accusing him of sponsoring terrorism via weapons supply to eastern Nigeria and openly urging violence against the armed forces. Fingers remain crossed to see if he will appeal the judgment. From Lagos, Nigeria, Louisa Olani, WION, World is One.
So, your thoughts on this story? Obviously, being a Nigerian yourself, I know you know the history, and maybe some context will be helpful for those who are watching, who are wondering why we're reporting on this story and the importance of this arrest.
Yes, just a quick history. So, IPOB, which he referenced, is actually the International People of Biafra. That's what that stands for. Well, Biafra was a state that was created in southeastern Nigeria and declared independent in 1967 by Ojukwu, a man named Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu. According to Ojukwu, the separation was needed due to ethnic tensions and marginalization of the Igbos who are from that region. The Nigerian government opposed the move, and that led to a war, which has actually been tagged one of Africa's deadliest conflicts, with about 1 to 3 million unalivements. And this, largely from famine, which was actually caused by blockades. The government actually, caused it was a weapon of war, actually caused the blockade, so the people could not get food and they couldn't get aid and things like that. Then in 1970, Biafra surrendered, but the damage from that war still haunts Nigeria today. Now, a separatist group was created in 2012 to restore Biafra. It's called, again, the Independent People of Biafra, IPOB. The founder was a man named Nnamdi Kanu, who is a British Nigerian radio broadcaster. He had a show, a radio show through which he would transmit his thoughts. So in 2017, IPOB was actually banned by the government. Then Nnamdi, the founder, was arrested in 2021 while in Kenya under the Buhari administration. He was extradited and has been locked up since without any trial. Now to Simon Ekpa. He rose to prominence as a factional figure after Kanu's 2021 detention. Under Ekpa's influence, enforcement of sit-at-home orders in the Southeast reportedly coincided with deadly attacks and severe economic disruption. We're talking hundreds of unalivements and multi-trillion naira losses since 2021. So some are relieved about this arrest. Nigeria pressed for this extradition of Ekpa, but the Finnish case proceeded on offenses committed from within Finnish territory. Under Finland's criminal code, participation in a terrorist organization and public incitement for terrorist purposes are crimes prosecutable when the conduct occurs from within Finland, even if the harm is elsewhere, especially when the accused is resident in Finland. Ekpa has denied wrongdoing. He's appealing, but one thing we cannot deny is how quickly the European court has acted, as they should, even when the agitation is towards another country, unlike the case of Nnamdi Kanu, who has been on trial since his arrest in 2021. I just thought I should add that. You're on mute.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that all that context is really helpful. And what I anticipate is after he has finished his prison sentence, he will be extradited to Nigeria, and then they will then be able to carry out their own sentencing, whether they determine it's concurrent or it'll have to be running as an additional sentence in Nigeria is to be determined. But I think we'll see what happens then, and I'll just mention, one of the things that I find I take issue with in particular with this story is, every other movement, whether I agree with the movement or not, the leaders are on the ground with the people fighting for that particular stance, right? If they really believe in it, they're there with their people fighting. What I find troubling about this is that he was in Finland arming people in another place and telling those people to do something, if this is true. Yeah. He wasn't there in person. So all of this loss of life is occurring at his hands from far away. So he's getting other people to do his dirty work. But if you really believe what you're saying, then you should be on the ground with the people. When you think about movements in the United States where ones that we disagree with and ones we agree with, right? So the ones that we disagree with, like the Confederates, or the ones we agree with, like civil rights movement, right? Martin Luther King was at the sit-ins, right? He was the head of a movement, and he sat at the counter and he dealt with the consequences of that movement. I think that is where I would respect this more, is if you're going to take part in something like this, you need to be on the ground participating, because then that's when you determine what kind of approach you're going to take. I think that, I don't know if he'd be as flippant as he was if he had to be in country to deal with those circumstances. And so I just wanted to add that point, because I think it's cowardice, to be honest, to be directing people thousands of miles away to take action that you're not directly going to be affected by. And so, yeah, it's about time he was arrested, if in fact he did do these things, right? It looks like trial has happened and he was convicted. So I don't have to say allegedly. It seems as if he has done it, you know. All right, so moving on from Nigeria, we are now moving to South Africa. Oh, sorry, no, one more story in Nigeria. And Nigeria has actually banned for 6 months the immediate export of raw shea nuts from Nigeria, with the primary goal of boosting local processing, enhancing value addition, and protecting the nation's shea industry. So the key details of the ban are: the ban is effective immediately and set for 6 months, after which it will be reviewed. The measure is described by the government officials as a pro-value addition, meaning it's aiming to secure raw materials from Nigerian processors, increase domestic job creation, and then evaluate rural incomes. So Nigeria is the world's leading producer of shea nuts, accounting for nearly 40% of the global supply. Yet the country captures less than 1% of the multi-billion-dollar global shea economy. So let's just put those numbers into perspective before we get into this video. I just want to say that again. Nigeria accounts for 40% of the production and global supply of shea nuts and shea butter. Yet the country captures less than 1% of the multi-billion-dollar global shea economy. So the reasons for the ban are just that, right? Large portions of Nigeria's raw shea nuts were being exported informally and cheaply, often neighboring countries where the value-added processing takes place. Nigeria's processing factories were operating at limited capacity, only 35 to 50% utilization, despite high national installed capacity, and that's due to insufficient raw materials. And several other West African nations, Ghana, Mali, Burkina Faso, Togo, and Cote d'Ivoire have already implemented similar bans to protect and grow their local industries, making Nigeria a target for optimistic and unregulated foreign buyers. So with that, let's just jump into the video and then we'll have some commentary on the other side.
Ahmed Tinubu has approved a 6-month temporary ban on the export of raw shea nuts to curb informal trade, boost local processing, protect and grow Nigeria's shea industry. The ban, which is with immediate effect, is subject to review on expiration and specifically aimed at boosting Nigeria's shea value chain to generate around $300 million annually in the short term. Vice President Kashim Shettima, who announced the president's directive on Tuesday during a multi-stakeholders meeting at the Presidential Villa, called on the Federal Ministry of Finance and other relevant government agencies to fast-track enforcement. Speaking further on the directive, the Vice President said the decision was not an anti-trade policy, but a pro-value addition policy designed to secure raw materials for processing factories and enabling industries run at full capacity.
All right, so I'll leave it there. It's a tough one to listen to all the way through to the end, but you guys got the updates in the notes. So Gloria, what are your thoughts on this ban? You know, knowing that there's been a let's say a distrust, dislike in the country for the current administration. Do we feel like this is the right move, considering you know, other countries have taken that move, and do you think that the people of Nigeria will appreciate this?
Well, I say kudos to the government for this, because this is basically to help secure enough raw material for domestic processors and, you know, move up the value chain from raw nuts to actually higher margin butter and oil. And this will also help create rural jobs. I'm a huge fan of shea butter. I have some in my house as we speak. I got that from Ghana though. You know, yeah. Target actually sells. Yeah, like it's amazing. It's incredible. So I'm a huge fan. Matter of fact, part of why I was excited when I moved back to Nigeria, one of the reasons was, oh, I get endless supply of shea butter, you know, because at the time it was even way more scarce in the US than it is now. But anyway, as you've pointed out, Nigeria actually supplies roughly 40% of the world's raw shea, but we capture less than 1% of an industry that's around $6.5 billion. So the logic to keep the kernels at home and process them domestically and export the finished ingredients into food and beauty supply chains is a great development, if you ask me. West Africa has long exported raw commodities while importing higher value products. It's so ironic, and this is a colonial pattern that's visible even in groundnuts, in palm produce, in cotton, and later crude oil versus refined products. So the shea belt's value chain is often called women's gold, and millions of women collect and pre-process nuts seasonally. I've actually seen them, well, I see them after it's been finished, but it's just so cool, seeing them hawking it, on the streets, and it sells like hotcake because there are people who know the value of shea butter. And I think doing something like this could, if we do it right, it could actually even promote it, which will be great even internally for us. The global sales are, of course, goals, but even domestically, we could really make it appealing to people. It is actually a product that ironically trades cheaply, and the processed butter and fractions that are used as for cocoa butter equivalents and in personal care, they actually command more money. So locking in supply can help processors run at capacity and allow the shea belt to actually capture a higher, steadier income. And I am excited about this, but I will say, going beyond all this, those targets need plants that can actually buy consistently at fair prices. We have to have power. We have to have logistics. We have to have quality systems that meet food and cosmetic standard. Another thing to note is that when governments heavily distort prices or channels, smugglers step in. Okay, cocoa is a cautionary tale this year. Nigeria, my parents and I were talking about this recently, the cocoa that we actually own, and that's throughout West Africa. But we have large volumes leaking across borders when official farm prices lagged market reality. So done right, value addition can stabilize incomes and attract investment. But I think in any case, there is room to climb the ladder. Hopefully there's no corruption in this, not that I'm expecting that to be the case. So if people are concerned, to your question, Joe, it would be around this, like, will this even be managed well, or is this just another way to grab money? But if Nigerian plants can actually meet consistent delivery schedules demanded by confectionery and beauty multinationals, I think this could work.
Yeah, and to your point, I think you mentioned that many raw materials are sourced from Africa and then refined elsewhere. You mentioned the crude oil, etc. This isn't a pattern, a larger pattern that Nigeria has finally taken on, the idea of refining crude oil, right? There's a state-sponsored refinery that was to be opened or already opened. Obviously, the Dangote refinery opened within the last year or two. So we now see that crude oil is being refined and exported. So hopefully that means more jobs and more money for the Nigerian people. That is TBD, but at the very least, it brings the opportunity for that to happen. And that's the biggest challenge, right? You have raw earth materials coming out of Africa, being refined elsewhere and sold back to Africans at exorbitant prices. The iPhone, like 90% of the material that is in an iPhone comes from mostly the Congo, to be honest. And yet people all around Africa are spending $1,000+ for a phone that costs $10 to make and gets pulled out of the ground by cheap slave labor and harsh working conditions, right? And so as you mentioned, this is women's gold, right? And so this is an economy that is one that can be hugely beneficial to those women. They can get paid more fair wages, and more people can join in the industry, and more in the chain, right? Not just sourcing, but then also refining as well. So that just gives more jobs for more people, and hopefully that does lead to more refinement and more of it happening within the country. But we will see. All right, so moving on to the to South Africa now. Julius Malema, a controversial figure who at one point in time, he had more Google searches than the President Ramaphosa. I think since Ramaphosa has come to the United States to visit with President Trump, etc., he's become a more well-known figure. But previously, Malema was who people thought was going to become the next president of South Africa. Instead, Ramaphosa won re-election and aligned with the Democratic Alliance, which is a mostly white or Dutch group. I would say Dutch lineage group. You know, they are considered Afrikaners, and they consider themselves Africans, but they are of Dutch lineage. They are not indigenous Africans, and that is who makes up most of the government. But you know, Malema has always been a fiery figure. The EFF is known as you know, kind of the far left group within South Africa. Many folks support the EFF outside of South Africa, but it feels and it seems as though people within South Africa chose to go with the reigning ANC party. But anyway, Malema has been accused of hate speech and convicted of hate speech based on the 2022 rally, which you guys all remember, the Shoot the Boer rally. There were some other things that are said. It's a part of a chants that were from apartheid era South Africa, which I cannot repeat here because although they're just, you know, they're symbolic, they are not able to be used by us when we speak on YouTube. But anyway, he was accused by the Trump administration, of course, of being at the forefront of what they called an anti-white movement, and was and at one point in time, he was the picture that one of the pictures that was shared to Ramaphosa by Trump as saying, and a video I think played for him saying that this is the reason for the quote unquote white genocide in South Africa. And so he has been convicted of hate speech. So we will play a video and have some commentary on the other side.
South African politician Julius Malema has been found guilty of hate speech for comments he made at a 2022 political rally. "No white man is going to beat me up," Malema said. "You must never be scared to kill." The country's equality court ruled that the statement demonstrated an intent to incite harm. But Malema's far-left Economic Freedom Fighters Party said it had been taken out of context. Malema featured in a video US President Donald Trump played to South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa during a meeting at the White House earlier this year. Trump falsely accused the South African government of sanctioning the murder of white farmers in order to steal their land. The US has since cut all financial aid to South Africa's government, alleging anti-white and anti-American policies. Malema was previously found guilty of hate speech in a separate case for repeating an anti-apartheid era chant at rallies. That verdict was later overturned. No order has yet been made regarding Malema's punishment in this latest case.
Thoughts, Gloria, on this conviction for hate speech?
Okay. So in 2011, an equality court found Malema guilty of hate speech for singing a particular song and then interdicted him for using it. A later equality court in 2022 applied updated constitutional guidance, held in a different case that the chant at issue in that record did not meet the legal test for hate speech when properly contextualized. The takeaway is that South African courts assess each case on its own facts. They look at the specific words, the setting, and how a reasonable listener would actually understand them. It also matters that South Africa in 2024 enacted a new hate crimes and hate speech, an act that actually criminalizes certain hate speech, but the case here was not brought under that statute. This is why the media headlines may say found guilty of hate speech, while the legal posture is a civil liability finding with no criminal sentence attached to it. But the big conversation is around this issue of land and race in South Africa. Also, around the issue of what constitutes hate speech and a historical protest anthem. The political stakes are obvious. very sensitive. For supporters, judicial findings like this can feel like policing of liberation language or selective enforcement that actually suppresses dissent. For people who criticize, the ruling, it basically is overdue, and they think that there has to be some accountability for rhetoric that they believe endangers minorities and undermines non-racial constitutionalism. Bottom line, until the inequality in South Africa ends, you will keep having songs like this come up. It basically is only exposing a lack of healing and justice since apartheid.
Well put. I mean, look, I think, countries have their laws around what they consider hate speech, what they don't consider hate speech, what's allowed, what's not allowed.
Right.
And so, I think in a conviction like this, it may fall under the parameters of what they consider hate speech. I think that sometimes you have to question when someone is convicted for something like this, when what he said was in response to a hypothetical, right? There was a circumstance that happened. He said, I would not let that happen to me. I would respond X, Y, and Z way. It's different from him saying everyone should go out and do a certain action, right? So I do think it kind of toes the line. I think he's speaking to specifically saying, if someone mistreats you, you respond in kind. Now, some people may disagree that a politician should say something to that effect. That is a different thing. And maybe you can consider that potentially inciting violence. But I will say that he has been a fiery figure. He's been one that's galvanized a large sums of people. And prior to Ibrahim Traore coming into power, Julius Malema was that shining beacon of light that most people look to on the continent, that was speaking about economic injustices and what I would consider colonial mindsets, speaking against it. So, he's since kind of lost that same level of popular, being popular, because there are other people who are actually in power who are very popular now. He is an opposition leader. He's not in power. So I do think that has changed. And after another election where he did not win, I think it did change a bit in terms of the way people perceived him and how much spotlight he is getting. So as I've mentioned previously, he had like more than quadruple the searches that Ramaphosa had gotten on Google at one point in time. I think that is changing dramatically. So we will see at the next election if the EFF ever gets a chance to possibly win. And if he does get in power, what he would do. But until then, I think he would just be someone who is seen as an opposition leader of a quote unquote far left group. And without having any real power, it's mostly going to be opposition and not much change you will see in the country based on his policies that he is putting out there. With that, I think we can shift gears to more news from around the continent of Africa. So that ends the segment on the headlines that we've gone through. And these briefs and these headlines from around Africa are stories that you should be paying attention to, those who are watching. But we're not necessarily going to go through each and every one of them that's in the list in the description or too much detail. We'll probably just talk through a few headlines, and then it's up to you all to go out and do your research, because in the interest of time, we just don't have the ability to go through them in depth. Gloria, is there anyone in particular you want to cover off on? I know I had a long list there. Is there anyone that you wanted to call out specifically?
Yes, let's begin with Equatorial Guinea. Bang Ngonga, who went viral for... Joe, what was that thing you said off air that he needs to really consider a career in?
So Baltazar, you guys might remember, he has his I guess his middle name is Baltazar, but that was the way he was described by most people. I said that he was born in the wrong country, because had he been born in the United States and maybe even in Los Angeles, California, he would have had a different career. I think he is in the wrong career. He ended up in politics, but the amount of videotapes that were discovered during the original investigation led to worldwide admiration, I would say, and conversations about the staying power that this gentleman had. I'll leave it at that. But you guys may have seen the videos. It was very viral for a little while. And if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, look it up, because this is not the live stream to talk about that particular topic. But yeah, it was one that came up. I mean, I can't tell you how many people asked me to report on it and to talk about it. It was one of those stories.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing so hard. It's just the absurdity. Like this is actually somebody in power. His uncle is the president. He's actually the longest serving leader that Africa has. You know, he's been there since the 70s. And this is what you all are doing in office. It's just so ridiculous. But anyway, thank you for the background, Joe, correspondent. But anyway, so a court in Malabo has sentenced Ebang Ngonga, former head of Equatorial Guinea's National Financial Investigation Agency, to 8 years in prison, and has imposed a fine over embezzlement, abuse of office, and unlawful enrichment during his tenure. He was in office between 2015 and 2020.
Yes, and I would say of those 3 charges, only one is the real reason. Can you remind us of the 3 charges again?
The 3 charges again are embezzlement, abuse of office, and unlawful enrichment. I
think the abuse of office, meaning more likely the wives of those who are also in office, wives and sisters, is probably the reason why he has been sentenced to 8 years. That's what they could find, because after the initial investigation, they said that they didn't find anything except those tapes. 400. Anyway, look it up. You guys can look it up.
It might just be 4,000. There's way more out there that we haven't discovered. Not that I'm seeking to discover it. But so what you're trying to say, Joe, is that the victims of the abuse are the husbands of these women. Got it. Exactly. Next story. Exactly. Next story in Ethiopia. So Ethiopia's capital is hosting the 2nd Africa Climate Summit. It's going to be from September 8th to the 10th, alongside the UN Climate Week. They're going to be gathering leaders, innovators, and youth advocates to forge an African-led pathway for green growth, for jobs, and climate resilience. So I guess the big question is, can Africa lead the green transition?
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, look, we all need to be focused on that, but I think the Global South is the most impacted by the Global North's usage of non-renewable energy, but the Global South is expected to lead in renewable energy. And I think it's interesting, right? Because all these other countries have been able to leap forward, like, you know, Saudi Arabia, the United States, Russia, anybody who has either coal that keeps countries alive, like North Korea, or oil, like the United States, Canada, much of the Middle East, and some other parts of Africa. But as these countries on the continent of Africa discover more oil, it seems as though they do not get to benefit from that. And they're meant to follow and not only follow, but lead the green energy revolution. And so that is a point of contention for many folks. I am a green energy type of person, but I also understand that many countries have been able to build their wealth and their power through the traditional oil means. And so Africa is expected not to, right? And so that I just find that to be interesting. Anyway, moving on to the next story.
Next story. A catastrophic landslide, very sad stuff, in Sudan's remote Mara Mountains has buried an entire village, reportedly unaliving up to 1,000 people. And of course, when you think Sudan, you think of the ongoing civil conflict between the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces. And sadly, this conflict has actually delayed aid to the victims of this very tragic incident.
Yeah, and I think when these natural disasters happen, I think it's always sad. Mudslides. I mean, Sierra Leone is known for us having a mudslide where over 1,000 people experience loss of life. These things happen, and you know, the rapid response groups are just not rapid enough. You know, and I think that things like this happen all over the world, but I feel like with mudslides they're a little bit more preventable in terms of people being injured because of places where people build and places where people are. And you know, when you have large torrential downpours and rains, you kind of have to know what areas are going to be mostly impacted. So it's unfortunate, but generally mostly preventable to some degree. You may not be able to prevent the mudslide, but you may be able to prevent some of the loss of life. So hopefully this is a learning lesson for folks there, and other people around the continent to think about where they construct villages, houses, etc., knowing that this is a potential.
Right.
Any other stories?
Yes, let's go to Ghana. President John Mahama has removed the Chief Justice, Gertrude Tokonu, following a judicial inquiry that found her guilty of misconduct, including misuse of public funds and interference in judicial appointments. She has rejected the charges as politically motivated.
Yeah, I will say this happens pretty frequently. When somebody has been put into their office or into their role by a previous administration and the next administration comes in, there tends to be arrests or removals from office for corruption, etc., misuse of funds, mishandling of funds. I do think that when they are in office, many people do complain about it, but nothing can be done because generally they're of the same party. So when the new party comes in, that almost always happens. I'm not surprised. From what I understand, the same thing happened when Akufo-Addo got into office. There were many arrests of Mahama's former administration and people from his team. So I'm not surprised that when Mahama came into office, the same thing happened. Any other stories that we want to review?
Yes, let's go to Ethiopia, where doctors demanding better pay and safer working conditions have been arrested and harassed, particularly in the conflict-affected Amara region. At least one doctor was detained without charge and held for a week. And this crackdown comes amid a broader breakdown of the healthcare system and growing unrest among medical professionals in Ethiopia.
Yeah, I mean, this is tough, and I think it's important that, obviously doctors get paid a fair wage. I mean, it's that simple. Healthcare professionals in general. I've seen this in many places, especially at public hospitals, where these people are working long hours and they don't get paid, sometimes months. And so what do you think that does to the healthcare system? And then, of course, on top of that, the leaders don't have their healthcare done in country. They go elsewhere. So there's no incentive for them to improve it. So this is a problem. And I do hope that they get, fair wages and get paid what they should for the work that they are doing.
Awesome. That's all I have.
Great. Well, thank you guys for watching all the way to the end. As you can see, I was here to stay a little bit extra in overtime because I don't have a call that came right after this one. But I want to thank you guys all for staying to the end. And thank you again, Gloria, for joining us and helping us get through these stories and giving the context. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to and follow Gloria on all platforms. As you can see, it's at the Gloria AO on all platforms, IG, YouTube, everywhere. And if you are part of Gloria's tribe and you are watching, make sure you follow and subscribe to Authentic African. It's Authentic African on YouTube, Authentic_African on Instagram. And make sure you tune back in next Thursday for us to go live again on next week's story. So until then, thanks for watching. See you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.